Hello everyone, welcome to the course, and my name is Vinod, and we'll be doing a bunch of things today in terms of introduction to the course. We'll begin by talking about the content. So during this content, we'll talk about why we want to do this course, what is the instructors for this course, what are some of the course expectations, we'll talk about the course curriculum, and finally we'll move on to the topics in terms of what is it we want to be covering for today. So let's jump straight in. So what is this course? Why are we doing this course? The reason behind me putting up this course is I want to make sure this caters to all the students out there, all the working professionals out there. And there's a certain set of skills required when you go out to the labor market, when you're looking for jobs. Job search is not easy and it's not intuitive. So whether it is your first job, second job, fifth job, or 10th job, all of you will find value from this course. I've tried to borrow from my experience of around 2 decades in human resources and will walk you through what the mind of a recruiter is. What do they look for? And I feel that when I studied abroad in the US, there was no such course to help us understand what do we need to do when it comes to the job search process. Everyone, including the universities, talk a lot about technical skills, which is fantastic, but in terms of pure job search capability, you're always on your own. You learn by trial and error. So the idea of this course is to teach you an end-to-end model of how do you look for jobs, how do you find jobs in the market. So if you look at the entire job search process, there are 3 big pillars when it comes to job search. The first pillar is clearly going to be your resume preparation. You got to have a fantastic resume ready. And the more finished and well polished your resume looks like, the better for you. The second pillar is networking preparation. Ideally, you want to be talking to people from within the company. You already should know a couple of folks from within the company, have a relationship, identify what the company is doing, and this way you'll be able to impress the recruiters during the interview process. And that brings us to the third pillar, which is about the interview preparation. So interview preparation is all about how do you prepare for interviews in advance so that at the time you do your interviews, you leave a very positive impression. Let's talk a little bit about who am I, who are the instructors for this course. So I am Vinod Arvindakshan. Again, I'm a master's and I've studied in the US. And we've been working, both Vibin and I have been working in the US and Silicon Valley for a long time. So my last job was as a HR director across multiple companies. And we recently came back to India. And right now we serve as an advisor to a bunch of IITs. So I'm an IIT Bombay graduate. So I've seen how the IITs work and I've also seen how foreign universities work. So I'll try to bring a holistic, well-rounded perspective in terms of what you can do to get better at the job search process. Similarly, Vibin has a similar background. He has done his master's and MBA abroad. He's IIT Madras graduate, and he too has worked in the Bay Area, including San Francisco, for some time. So his last job was as a product director at Salesforce. And before that, he has worked in Amazon, he has worked in Hewlett Packard, he has worked in Samsung and a bunch of other companies. So his experience has always been in the field of product management. And both of us have this company called CareerBolt.app, and we try to spread information about how do you better prep for jobs and how do you get to the market in a way which best suits you and helps you play to your strengths. Okay, so what do we want to do through this course, right? So this course, look at it as something which you're not doing it to get grades. You're not here just to finish through the reading material and say, okay, I'm done with the course. And it's not something which you will do once and then forget later. The truth is, the learnings from this course is going to stick with you forever. So the reading material from this course, we are going to be a bunch of reading material on top of the PowerPoint presentations. It is a bit optional. I don't expect each one of you to read each one of the stuff we provide, but the more you read, the more comfortable you're going to be. You just need to take this one course and you're going to be very comfortable anytime in the future. Like I said, whether it's your first job, fifth job, or 10th job. These readings are going to help you for life. And most importantly, I think the big takeaway for you folks is that you understand how a recruiter looks at this entire interview process. So it's very easy for a student or a recruiter to sit on one end and then say that, hey, I have a great resume. I'm a very strong candidate. Now I hope that I get selected. That's the way they approach it. And what we are going to tell you is that's good, but it's more important to understand, okay, during the interview process, what do the recruiters want? And sometimes what the recruiters want is very different from what you bring to the table. So the closer the match between both of you, the higher your chances of finding a job. And right now, this is going to be very important because the job market is not good. and you are going to be one among thousands of people looking for a job. So again, the question is, how do you differentiate yourself from the hundreds of people out there, from the thousands of people out there? So that's what we're going to be focusing on for this session. So what about a course curriculum? There's going to be a bunch of lectures. After that, it's going to be followed by quizzes. This is pretty much going to be MCQs, multiple choice format, maybe a couple of calculations here and there. So that's pretty much what you can expect. So as long as you listen to these lectures, you should be in very good shape. As long as you maybe read some of a reading material, it'll help you even more, because then you get expanded knowledge of what is happening in the market. And the more you read, the more comfortable you're going to be. So if you just listen to lectures, you may not get the highest grades in this course, so you will have to go through the reading material. That's going to be important. Final exam, that's always going to be there. Again, to help review whatever you learned in the course. Remember, don't do it for the grades. This is one course where you have to take a step back and say, hey, I'm not here to get the best possible grade. It's there for your learning. Whether you go on to do your MS abroad, MBA abroad, PhD abroad, get your first job, second job, third job, fifth job, 10th job, these learnings will always be important. So look at it from that perspective. And most of the details in terms of what is a course, what is a curriculum, all this will be posted on the website, and even all the grading details will also be posted on the website. Okay, so now let's take a step back in terms of saying, how do we break up this entire picture of job search? It's a very big topic. So many things to be covered. So what we have done is we have broken it down into 4 weeks. So each week we're going to cover a list of subjects. So first week we're going to talk very much about what is it that the recruiters want in terms of what is their perspective, what do they want from candidates. When they look at a resume, they want a certain set of things. When they're looking at your interviews, they want a certain set of things. What is that something? What is the secret sauce they're looking for? Once you understand what they want, then you'll be able to give them exactly what they're looking for. So that's being an effective salesman in terms of pitching yourself to the recruiter. So that's the first point we'll cover in week 1. We'll talk about how the entire hiring process works, right from the time you apply to the company website or you use a referral to the time that you get called for interviews by the recruiter. Then they line up a second round of interviews, call you for interview day where you're interviewed by a bunch of people. We'll talk about all of that. We'll talk about how the calibration process works, how the interviewers get together and decide who the best candidate is. We'll talk about that. And we'll talk about how you get to offer. We'll also talk about some of the best practices after you get the offer. So what are some good things to do? What are some good things not to do? So we'll talk even about those things. We'll also talk about why this company, why this sector. So what should you make your decisions on? So for example, you have options in finance, consulting, computer science, data analytics, core engineering, so many options. So how do you decide? Do you just go by whichever company comes to you and picks you up, you just join that company? Is that the way you're going to do it? Or do you have a better model, a better strategy of approaching jobs? So we'll throw some thoughts, some options to help you make these decisions. Very importantly, most people forget that compensation is not the important factor when it comes to company. There's a lot of other factors to consider when you choose companies. So in fact, we make a case that high compensation alone masks a lot of bad things happening in the company. So what are those things? What are some decision-making criteria? We'll touch on that on week 1. We'll also help you understand what are labor markets. When I say labor market, it's where recruiters and job seekers intersect in the market. They meet in the market. They try to search for each other. So we'll try to understand the basics of economics, and economic theory is very helpful in helping you understand how labor markets are, what the demand curve is, what the supply curve is. So we'll not get too much in depth, but you'll get a general understanding of how to choose jobs based on labor markets. Okay, so week 2 is going to be something similar, where we just shift into a different direction, which is all about helping you folks understand what are skills, right? So before you do anything about the job search process, you're getting into the details in terms of how do I now customize my resume? How do I prepare for interviews? Now, all of this depends on a bunch of things. What skills does the company want? That's where everything begins. So we'll talk about what are skills. We'll talk about the different types of skills. For example, some of the skills can be people skills. Some of the skills can be business skills. Some of the skills can be technical skills. And clearly, if you're studying in engineering in one of the schools in India, engineering schools in India, it's all about technical skills. But understand that companies want more than just pure engineering skills. They are looking for business skills. They're looking for people skills. So how do you sell yourself in terms of those skills? How do you prepare for it? So those are some things we'll cover in week 3, but let's begin with skills. Understand what is skills. How do you then write down the skills in your resume? How do you customize your resume? So that's important in terms of getting a feel of what to write on your resume, what not to write, what do people look for, what are some red flags when it comes to resume. A recruiter typically spends maybe 7 seconds reading a resume. So the question for you is, in just 7 seconds, how do you impress them, right? So that's a challenge. And we'll talk about how you can make that positive, strong impression. We'll then talk about networking prep. Networking prep is nothing but reaching out to people from within the company. So whether you're out in the open job market or even if you're going through campus interviews, if you like certain companies, you absolutely want to work in some companies, you have to reach out to people in advance, maybe seniors, maybe people working in the company, strike a relationship, talk about that. And we'll talk about why that is important. Without networking, it's very difficult to get through an interview process. Just telling an interviewer that you've talked to people from within the company sends a very, very positive impression. It's an easy way to get noticed. So we'll talk about networking prep. We'll also briefly touch on LinkedIn preparation in terms of having a very good, solid LinkedIn profile, which looks impressive. So whenever a recruiter looks at your resume, they're always also going to look at your LinkedIn profile. So how do you impress recruiters? That's going to be one of the key factors for you during this session when you're learning through us. We'll finally close by doing a mid-session review for week 2. Week 3 is taking week 2 forward in terms of making sure that we touch on a bunch of things out here. So the first thing is we'll talk about interview preparation. But before interview preparation, we'll again review the hiring process in terms of what do the recruiters look for. And during interview prep, what are some of the questions which are likely to come your way? And many of these questions can be predicted just by looking at the resume. That's shocking, isn't it? But it does work. So we'll talk briefly about how you can predict the questions which come at you. So we'll do that interview prep. We'll talk about STAR questions, which is basically all HR interviews. A lot of the business questions use something called the STAR framework. It's situation, tasks, actions, and results. And this is a way by which you can structure your answer. There's a structured methodology for answers. We'll talk about the STAR framework. And if you use the framework, your answers will absolutely look fantastic. So the same answer given by 2 candidates, one using the STAR framework, other not using the STAR framework, the interviewer is going to be 100% impressed by the person who's using the STAR framework. And we'll talk about the framework. This is typically used in business schools and during the MBA program, but I feel that any student can use this STAR framework when it comes to giving solid interview answers. We'll talk about some very difficult STAR questions. What if there are some questions you cannot answer? What if there are some very difficult questions where you're stuck, you have no idea how to proceed? What is the intention of the recruiter when they're asking you these questions? Do they really, for example, if they ask you questions like, what's your biggest weakness? Why are they asking that question? What do they want to gain from that question? And how can you give an optimal answer? So we'll touch on those things. We'll talk a little bit about body language, how to make sure that you come across as being very positive and impressive during that period of interviews. We'll talk about that. We'll also walk through the campus interview process in terms of what can you do to stand out. We'll talk about how to impress the recruiters. Again, we have seen lots and lots of campus interviews. I've done so many campus interviews myself, and I'm going to share my tips in terms of how you can do a better job in terms of impressing recruiters. And for example, after the end of the campus interview process, for example, if you're not able to take up a job, we'll show you a structured, respectful way of declining offers. We'll talk even about those things. So that's week 3. Then it's about week 4. So this is kind of closing up this entire conversation. Maybe taking a step back from all this conversation so far, week 1, week 2, week 3, we come back and then ask ourselves, okay, what do we want to gain through jobs? What is it we call as careers? What's the meaning of a career? What is a career strategy to put in place? What's a long-term strategy in terms of careers? So it's not about getting a job today and changing jobs to another high-paying job tomorrow. What do I want to gain? And what we argue is that you should be focused on skills. What is it you want to bring to the table? And you can do a lot of the mapping in advance. We call it skill map analysis. And the more you map what is it you're going to do, the more successful you're going to be in the job market. So we'll talk about the long-term career strategy. If you want to grow up the company, go to a senior position, how do you hit the expectations? Do you just allow your manager to tell you what to do, or are you going to take charge of your career? So we'll talk about, again, a couple of things about how to prepare in advance, how to look at skills, how to do skill mapping, and have a strategy in place. We'll also talk a little bit about higher education. I know a lot of undergrads are probably taking this course. So as an undergraduate, you're thinking, should I do an MS program? Should I do an MBA program? Should I do a PhD program? So we'll touch very briefly on what that means. We'll touch on things like getting jobs in academia after doing a PhD. What does that mean? How does it compare with the industry job? We'll touch on those things. And we'll also maybe touch a little bit of time on once you get a job and you're waiting to join your company, one question you'll have is, can you do something in advance so as to get ready for the company? Are there some specific techniques, some skills which you need to bring to the table so that you are successful in your first 3 months in the job? Will you create a positive impression? So getting ready for industry is a little different from finishing your education. It's a little bit about a new set of skills you have to develop. So we'll touch about how industry is going to evaluate you for the first 3 months, 6 months, and what can you do from your end to get ready for these sort of jobs. We'll end by doing a final review. Again, we'll review all the stuff so far so that when you look at those slides, you pretty much get a good sense of having the midterm review, final review, you have a good sense of what was taught in this course. So that's pretty much what we're going to cover in this conversation in terms of what we have for this entire course. Till next time, folks, bye. Cheers.